The best thing about having a YouTube channel is the conversations I'm having with you guys. I get many interesting questions in the comments and by email. So I thought I'd make a video about some of them because I think it might help everyone. Here it is. I'm first going to cover the questions regarding the Q system, then regarding the M system, and in the end regarding the SL system. I set chapter marks so you can jump to the question that interests you directly. Before I start with the questions, let me react more to a request than a question. A few weeks ago, I did videos about the Q3 and SL3 menus. For the SL, I did a sheet with how I assigned my buttons, and I got asked a lot if I could do the same for the Q3. Yes, I did that. The link is in the description. Starting today, after a lot of you also requested it, I'm also offering my LCS files from the Q3 and SL3 settings to download for free. It's all in the same link, and again, it's free. Now to your questions. Tien Joik, I hope I pronounced the name right, does ask, does Leica make sensors? As far as I know, no they don't. It is assumed that it's all Sony sensors, especially the new 60 megapixel sensors, because I think Sony, as far as I know, is the only brand that does produce 60 megapixel sensors. Also the 47 megapixel sensor, I think we had the same sensor in one of the Panasonics. A little bit a strange sensor is the sensor we have in the Leica M10R and M10 Monochrome, because it's a 41 megapixel sensor, and I'm not aware of any other camera having a 41 megapixel sensor. So maybe if you're aware of that, maybe you can put it in the comments. Werner Winkler asks, has the Q3 the same rattle noise from the OIS, the optical image stabilization, when turned off, like the Q and the Q2? I don't know. Let's check that. Let's set it on. It's really, I don't hear it anymore, even though it's on. And then let's turn it off. I cannot hear anything. So that changed. I'm actually not sure if I answered that correctly when Werner first asked me, because I thought I still hear the noise, but now it's gone. Tony Hayes asks me, I was wondering if you had any issues with dust getting into the Q sensor after prolonged use. No, I had never an issue. I had the Q2 for like 5 years almost. I have never had dust in that camera, in the sensor. It was absolutely perfectly sealed. Eric Guillaume asks, how does zone focusing work on a Leica Q3? Is it really reliable? And how do you adjust the distance ring to focus on a distance of 3 meters? So 3 questions in one. Zone focusing works on every camera the same. We turn the aperture ring, let's say to an 11 for show purpose. Then we turn the infinity marker here. We turn it until 11. And then we can see from about 1.2 meters to infinity, everything should be in focus. Let me check. To talk about advanced zone focusing, we can also set 2 meters on 11. And then we have from 0.7 around until 2 meters, everything should be in focus. The problem with the camera, he asked about 3 meters. We don't have 3 meters here. We have only 2, and then we are in infinity. So to know which point in the lens 3 meter is, the only thing you can do is put the camera on a tripod. Then we take an electronical laser measurement tool. I expect the sensor not exactly at the beginning of the body. I expect it a little bit further in. And then we search for the exact 3 meter position. Best is if we have magnification turned on, and then we set the focus on that 3 meter mark. After that, we put a little tape on that position where we have the 3 meter mark. Now the upper corner of that tape marks the exact point where the 3 meter are. And then we set our aperture to 8, and then we turn the focus ring until 8. That we now should have everything from about 1.2 meters to 3 meters in focus. That's the way I would do it. Cold Gecko, cool name, asks regarding the Q3, do you ever fight with the fact that the focal length is 28 millimeters? Say you see something in the distance and normally would swap out for a 70-200 or whatever, but you only have a 28 and have to crop. Do you feel the struggle? Yes, I feel the struggle. Honestly, I had that situation. It is a 28, and even though you can crop in, it looks different. I like telephoto shooting. Q only has the 28. I really struggle sometimes with that, but it has an excellent 28. So if you want to know more about the 28 lens, I also did a video about that. I'll put a link for that in the description as well. Ramon has a specific question. Let's say I want all automatic, only the aperture manual. Make some really dark images in a bright day with f16. Why doesn't the viewfinder LCD refresh at the same time as I move the aperture? It just keeps the image bright. Only after taking the picture you can see the result. Even with the half press on the shutter, you only see the image more bright or like it blinks. So Ramon, I think I initially got your question wrong. That's why my answer said it's possible, but of course it's not possible. And it is weird for me that it's possible because you say it's possible on other cameras. If you only set the aperture on manual, the ISO and the shutter speed will always be corrected by the camera. If I now have shutter on automatic and I have ISO also on automatic and only the aperturing is manual, if I turn it, nothing happens. If I half press the shutter button, here you have your flashes, and your flashes are because the camera changes the ISO settings to correct what I'm doing with the aperture. If I now switch into manual shutter speed and if I switch into manual ISO, it's a whole different game. I'm not pressing the shutter button. I now turn the aperturing and I see the perfect preview because ISO and shutter speed stay the same. That's the only thing you can do. I don't know why it should work differently with the other cameras. Doesn't make sense for me because they will always correct the other settings. Soro Mac 1972, we share the same birth year, asks, currently I own a Sony a7 III and a Sony 24-70 2.8 G Master 2. Tamron 35 to 150 f2 to 2.8. What do you advise me? Would you change the whole Sony packet and switch to a Leica Q3? I don't know, because that's a completely different kit. So you would have like all focal length and a very good camera that makes solid pictures, and you turn it into a small compact camera that only has a fixed 28mm lens. It's a completely different thing. I mean, I would encourage you to buy a Q3, but as I told many times, the Q is the entry drug into the Leica ecosystem. I had the Q2 first and it totally hooked me on Leica. And then I sold all my Nikon gear and bought my first Leica M and later an SL. So to go from your kit to only a Q3, that's a change. But hey, why not? Change is good. Emmanuel Flores wants to know Q3 or Q2 Monochrome for black and white photography. Here I would definitely say Q2 Monochrome, because if you only do black and white photography, use a native monochrome sensor, because then you can do filter work as well, which doesn't work with the color sensor. I did a video about color filters on the monochrome sensor. I put also a link in the description. I would say if you really only do black and white photography, always use a monochrome sensor. William Gross or William Gross. I'm curious, which photo editing system do you use? I use Lightroom Classic and Lightroom, the new Lightroom. I import everything into Lightroom Classic, and then I have the Adobe Cloud and I upload everything to the cloud so I have it with me all the time. I also do store my DNGs in the Adobe Cloud, which is a weird and complicated thing to do. I did a video about that. If you're interested in that, it only works on Mac. I had many questions why my system does not work for Windows. I don't know. I only use Mac, but in Mac it works perfectly. Check out that video. Geronimo asks, would you say that when it comes to decide whether to choose a Leica Q2 Monochrome versus the Leica Q3, the Lightroom AI noise reduction speaks a lot for the Q3 as it minimizes the advantage of the monochrome sensor in low light conditions? I never tested it, but there are tests around that indicate that the Q2 monochrome sensor and the Q3 color sensor are about the same in a low light performance. But as I said before, if you shoot only monochrome, use a monochrome sensor because the whole monochrome experience is totally different. With a color camera, of course, you just can take out the saturation and then you have a monochrome picture and you can manipulate it in a similar way as if you would use filters. But the whole experience of using filters, of deciding for a filter and do it haptic in camera, I think that's just the better experience. Shane Turner asks about the Leica Looks in the Q3. So basically, if you have all Leica Looks installed, the Q3 has 10 color presets built in. Yes, that's true. I think now it's even 11 because with the SL3 there was a new Leica Look introduced. So I think we even have in total 11 color presets. But they only work on JPEGs. They have no effect in the DNGs. Remember that. If you want to use them, shoot JPEG. Uwe Jansch wants to know how to bulk import from the Leica Q3 into the Leica FOTOS app. Let me show. It's actually pretty easy. You just need to establish a connection. Then you open up the gallery from the camera. Then you press on the checkbox icon on the right. Then you either select all, I unselect them now, or you just select the ones you want to import. And then you press download on the bottom and decide which format you want to download to your phone, or it works the same on your iPad. Now we have more information, not a question, but that started out from a question by Robin Dupuy. I did say in my second Leica Photos video that every camera with an USB-C connection can be set up through the Leica FOTOS app. It works for me with the SL2 and the firmware 6.0. Robin has an SL2S and it did not work. He even called Leica and they confirmed that they do not support a connection via cable to the Leica FOTOS app for the SL2S. Only the Q3, the SL3 and the M11 for now. It worked for my SL2, maybe I was lucky. Goulet1 asked me, what do you take more often, the Q or the M? That's hard to say. I actually have my phases. I have like my Q phase where I only take the Q. Then the next week, I only take the M. They're completely different tools. I cannot say I prefer one over the other. It's really, I'm really lucky and fortunate to have both. So I can take whatever I feel to take. I often carry both with me because they're not big and they're light. But in the end, when I come home, I only used one. So it's really hard to say for me, sorry. John Jennings wrote me very kindly after my rangefinder video. Now I want a rangefinder because you've demonstrated how slowing down and compositing one's image is not only fun, but far more creative and intentional than autofocus. Thank you. I am considering a used M10. Is that a good camera to get started? Thank you for your kind words. The M10 is a fantastic camera to start with a rangefinder system. I had an M10P when I first started, but I think it doesn't really matter which camera you take to start, because in the end, it's the rangefinder that calms me down. It's the workflow that calms you down. Which sensor is in there or where the buttons are located, that doesn't matter and that doesn't change the experience with the rangefinder. So the M10, the initial M10, fantastic camera to start. But I even think the older ones, if you can find them used on a good price, start with that. In the beginning, because I tend to always want to have the newest stuff, I tend to like upgrade very fast. So my M10P became very fast an M10R. But when the M11 came out, I was already at a point where I realized I don't care. The M10R or any M10, so good. And if you're okay with 24 megapixel, it's only a question about megapixels at one point. And especially the rangefinder experience. That's the thing that changed everything for me. And actually, as I tell in my video, changed my life. Seahawk Moments asked me, I just got an M11 question. What are the red numbers when looking through the viewfinder? What he refers to is when you have set your shutter speed on auto, there will appear some red numbers in your rangefinder viewfinder. This is the shutter speed the camera uses when set on automatic. When you change the aperture, this number jumps. So you change the shutter speed. When you set your shutter speed manually, those numbers go away and you have little arrows and a dot. The dot indicates that your exposition is right on point. The arrows point you to the direction where you should turn your aperture ring to achieve the right exposure. Renato Pedro also asked me for the M system, can we focus from the LCD not using the EVF? Of course. We have here this little cross, and this will show us where we're focusing on. Let's do the white car with the red light here. So if I turn the focus ring now, it brings up the red light and I can focus manually on the red light. And then when I have pressed the shutter button, I go back into normal mode and then I can just take my picture. In the settings on the second page, you have capturing assistance. There you can set focus peaking on and you can set it to red or whatever color you like, or you can turn it off. Now we're coming to the SL3. Shil asks me, how many bit colors has the SL3? 14-bit colors when you do photos. I know there are cameras out with 16-bit colors, but this has 14-bit colors. Dimitri wrote me and asked, I also have an Leica SL3 with a 24-90 lens. When I turn the lens by the stationary part, it rotates slightly in the mount. Is this normal or is this just my body? I would say this is normal. I think it's an L mount thing. I have also here the SL3 with the 24-90, and here we have a slight possibility to rotate. That's not happening with the M system. So no chance to do that. The M just sits there. To test it, let's do it with two other lenses as well. I have here a Sigma 85mm prime lens. Same problem. And I have the M to L adapter with an M lens on it. It also happens with the adapter. So it must be an L mount thing. I can't remember if I had the same issue with my Nikon or my Sony cameras, but I have it with the SL3 and I also had it with the SL2, but who cares? It's working. Chris Alberti asked me, can the SL3 be set up so the shutter closes when the camera turns off, protecting the sensor? My M10R does this, but my SL2 does not. So I have had problems with dust on the sensor when changing lenses in the field. Unfortunately, not. So for people who don't know what Chris is talking about, let me show you. When you turn off an M camera, the shutter closes. So it's constantly closed. This is possible because the light meter in the M10 series is this little thing here, this silver round thing. In the SL2 and 3 in the SL series and also in the M11 series, the sensor is the light meter. That's why it does not close. I think in the M11, I'm not sure if it closes, but in the SL, we can see it does not. I don't know why they don't offer that, because it would really make sense to close the shutter when the camera is turned off, so we can exchange lenses without getting any dust on the sensor. But I don't know. I know it's a request a lot of Leica SL shooters have, so I hope they may be implemented in future firmware. Lion City Hyperbole asked me, when I turn on eye face tracking in video mode, do I need to have press to focus? I find that if I have press, focus locks into just that one spot in the frame instead of the eye and face. There are several possibilities to activate face and eye detection, and maybe they behave a little bit differently for whatever you need it. So when you are in the focus mode, you have intelligent autofocus single, and continuous. I think you are on single. So if you are in single, you still can put in eye face body detection, but it needs 1 point. And this is probably what your setting is. What you need to do is to go to IAF, then you don't need to press anything, or you go into continuous, then the moment it detects a face, it just stays at the face. So the two settings you need to make are autofocus continuous and eye face body detection. Or you go into AIF, intelligent autofocus, and then the same is going to happen. Narcia asked me, may I ask what EV exposure value you try to keep with log video? Like, do you go 0 EV or -1 EV? I always go, when I do video, I always go 0 EV. And even when I do pictures, I go 0 EV. I try to set my exposure settings correct so I have the best exposure and the best possibilities in post-production. I do sometimes when I take picture, especially with the M10 Monochrome, I'm going to set it to 0.7 EV just to protect my highlights a little bit more. but that's only with the M10 Monochrome. With every other camera in any other mode, I always go with 0 EV and try to have the perfect exposure by using the aperture and the shutter speed. Or when I do video and I use a 180 degrees shutter, I will use ND filters to find the perfect exposure. This is it for this video. If you have any more questions, put them in the comments and I will try to answer them as soon as possible. Let me also know if you like this kind of content. Maybe I'm going to do a follow-up video or even a live session in the future. Till then, check out one of those 2 Leica videos, hit the logo to subscribe and not miss a future video. And do as I do. Stay curious.